So. Like religion, nothing we didn't see it.
Nicholas,
Welcome back.
I'm ready when you are.
Item one.
We're ready.
Great.
Okay, welcome everyone to a work session of the Mount Crested View Town Council. The topic of our work session is community grants with the Community Foundation of the Gunnison Valley. Tiffany.
So my name's on there, but honestly, I'm gonna turn it over to Scott and Lauren.
Okay.
They spent some time brainstorming and coming up with some ideas, which is all in your packet about how we could possibly move community grants to them. So they'll talk you through it.
All right.
Yeah, so, we first started having conversations with Tiffany a few months ago about whether it would make sense to explore that as an option. We've been administering an annual community grant cycle since there were two community foundations, and I think probably the Crested View Community Foundation was doing it first, carried over in the merger. It's been kind of a signature piece of our operations for the last 20 years. And we work on refining that every year. So you had the materials in your packet on sort of three options. You also have access to our website where all of the documentation on the guidelines, the scoring rubric, for local nonprofits for our cycle are. And then we provided a copy of, with permission, 6 points application this year. Because it's an online portal, the Word version of our grants application is not very pretty. So we thought the best way to present it was just to show an example of an application. Essentially, the way our annual community grant cycle works is the deadline is every year on May 15th at 11:59 p.m. It is online through SurveyMonkey Apply is a service that we work with. And so the applicants apply in that portal. Our board approves a community review committee every year. And that's usually about 8 or 9 individuals. They represent full, part-time, North, South Valley, couple of our board members, but mostly community members who do the review of those applications. So after May 15th, staff reviews all of the grant applications that we've received, just to determine eligibility. So we're only gonna kick someone out if they are ineligible. We then pass all the rest of the applications to that review committee. They review as individuals, they go through their own orientation, but they review as individuals on their own time for about 2 to 3 weeks and come together for a full day in June. This year it's June 24th. And briefly discuss each application and finalize their scoring. At the end of the day, they're then able to look at where the scores fell, and if anything looks, it's their opportunity to basically say, my top scoring applicant is in the bottom third. How did that happen? So they discuss how those scores come out and if it fits with their own review, and then allocate the funding available. So the process has been working very well. And from the options we propose to you, if you're interested in piloting, working with us on that, our favorite option is to keep the funding separate and still have one review committee. Hey, Roman, once we set up a new review committee, it's kind of a whole nother ball of wax, herding cats. And so that's why, the main reason why that's our preference. We would still want your involvement in some way. So is that a good starting place, and we can sort of dialogue?
Yes.
Answer questions? I think what would be really helpful to know on our end is what requirements, if any, you have. We've talked about an organization receiving your funds would need to be serving your town.
Yep.
The ones we're doing now, are they all the nonprofits?
A nonprofit or government entity.
Which is the same as ours, so
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, because I didn't see where the government entity in here.
Yeah, we at times are in a bad habit of referring to things like the Multicultural Resource Office, Gunnison County Substance Abuse Prevention Project, a lot of those as nonprofits because they interact with us in the same way.
Okay.
But those same government programs are eligible through our grant cycle.
Have you noticed any large disparities between the reporting requirements between town and you guys?
Is disparities between the reporting you require and what we require?
Yeah,
I didn't study it in detail. That's something that we could look at more closely. One thought that Scott and I had was that would be a place to have council's more direct involvement. Like if we set the expectations up front on what the applicants, what criteria they need to meet in order to get Mount CB community grant funding. And then agree on what that report would look like. And I think it would make sense to still use thinking of this as a supplemental, right? They still do the grant report, assuming they've received funding from us. And do a supplemental grant report for the Mount CB funds. And essentially then give that to council to review and sign off on.
Which would be option 3 is you've listed these, because I like option 2 better.
Option 2 is the one the one I'm talking about, the preference of one review committee.
But it doesn't come back to us in option 2, does it?
Well, this is a starting point. And you know, that we don't have an arrangement like this. And so we tried to brainstorm 3 paths that could make sense. Those could be tweaked. So our thinking with that one was, we still have that 1-day review committee. But there are, so the applicants have filled out our whole application. And they opt into, I want to apply for Mount Crested Butte funding. There's, let's say, 2 or 3 questions very specific to what you want to see from those applicants. Our thought was that we essentially provide you with the answers to those questions to do your own scoring according to a rubric we've agreed upon. We can marry that in some way with the committee review and allocate funding that way. So I think we have options for how council's involved. We, of course, don't want to make it overly complicated,
Yeah.
but something you're comfortable with.
What is your reporting? Do you know?
On
On your community grants, do you
Yeah.
require the grantees to do a report?
Yes.
Is that on your website?
It is. So if you are nonprofits, community grants,
Yep.
on the left, you scroll right down, community grant reports.
Those happen
Oh,
for
it is.
applicants directly in the same application that they originally submit on SM Apply. So if they are awarded, they'll go back into that original application, straight to their reporting form. Based on feedback over the last few years, we have tried to consolidate that a little bit on our end to make it less onerous on applicants as far as what they're reporting. But we do still require that for annually, yeah.
And you're right there, you can't access it through the
Okay.
the website right now because the reports were due April 30th. And
Okay, that's fine.
yeah.
But
But,
it's a component that if there's certain questions you guys want to ask,
Mhm.
yeah,
they can incorporate it.
Mhm.
yeah.
I have a question on top of what Steve just asked. I'm curious to know what we're doing right or not right with our current process. And whether we're missing the mark at all. Is that at all where you're going with that question?
I was getting more into my concern would just simply be that you're sucking up nonprofit bandwidth to expand reporting to 2 entities or to require additional reporting elements. So I would just hope that we would refine that, in appreciation of some of those bandwidth concerns, but
Yeah,
totally.
But I guess where I'm at is like, is this more of an effort of correcting something that we're doing wrong or just taking this out of our hands because we don't want to do it?
I think it's not that. I mean, it's not that we don't want to do it, it's just that somebody a step removed from us might be better able to administer it, I think was the general idea. So I don't think we're doing anything wrong. I just think this could be an improvement, perhaps. And again, people expert, we do it once a year, twice a year, if we count, I guess, admissions tax too. But it'd be turned over to folks, and it's their job.
I'm pretty clear, at least in my own mind, why I would want to do it, but I would like to hear from you guys, why would you even want to do this?
Well, in part because it's what we do. You know,
So you're looking for more to do?
well. Well, so the way we approach this, because we have had some rumblings, this is actually something we discussed probably 10 years ago, was there's a lot of different grant opportunities happening around the county. Does it make some sense to try and at least get an idea of who's giving what funding where? What are the priorities? Are there gaps that are being missed? And at the time, there wasn't really an appetite for that. And in the last few years, we've been approached. Like, this was not the first time we've been approached. It was just the most serious approach, from local municipalities or others who provide grant funding in, should we explore this as an option? So we were looking at this as, how can we set this up as let's call it a pilot year, if Mount CP is interested, and know that moving forward, we'd be able to sustain it if it's just their grant cycle and ours, or scale it if there are other entities in the valley that are granting who would like to do a similar thing.
I think that goes back to Steve's earlier points about the not only reporting, but just application time and energy that goes into for nonprofits locally and regionally. So consolidating that as much as possible, if those pathways are in place, to say, you don't need 2-3 separate applications if we can think creatively about how we're able to supplement each other's to make that pathway to nonprofit funding a little bit simpler. I think that's a motivator for us as well.
Have you looked at the list of who we've given grants to in the last couple of years?
No,
I was just wondering if how much overlap there was.
Yeah, it would be overlap, based on how we've talked about, I don't think I gave them a list when we talked about it, there would be overlap, so that is one question. You already have nonprofits out there getting money from the foundation and from us. With this system, especially if they do like a 2-pot, then that could happen again. And do you guys want to, I know you kind of, I don't want to say the word frown on, but do you want that to continue to happen?
But you will.
I know, I didn't know how to say it.
I would say that we don't currently deny our grants based on any other grants, so I don't see a difference in that necessarily. Where I see a big difference is the amount of resource that the community foundation has and provides, and the wealth of information and education that they have in-house. I think they can probably communicate and identify maybe concerns or issues that some applicants might be having, and possibly handhold in a way that we just maybe don't have the bandwidth for with town staff. I can't speak to it, and you could touch on that, but so I do think there's a value in that engagement with them in terms of just a little bit of value add for the applicants.
Well, I definitely can see the value of having, in essence, like a central clearinghouse, where, a one-stop shop, so to speak, for grants, that if anybody's interested in grants, having one entity that essentially was an umbrella that covered, or had everything channeled through them. So it simplified identifying, well, where do we go? And, I can see some, great value in that. My concern is that, is there going to be, you know, redundancy, I don't know if redundancy is the right word, but, you know, overlap of, you know, expenses where, you know, your expenses, you know, balloon because of taking on more work, but, you know, our expenses don't go down, you know, by doing this. And so I'm a little, aware of that. It definitely, you know, we need to come up with a good plan, you know, to make this, you know, good for everybody.
I do want to point out though that we're not here having a discussion on how we can save money that we're
Oh,
expending.
no, I wasn't,
Yeah, yeah.
I didn't jump into that, I just expressed my.
I just want to clarify that that's not an actual concern per se, that like if we were to handle them, we're not trying to sort of realize a sort of reduction in expense.
There's nothing wrong with realizing a reduction in expense and having that be part of the conversation, I think is prudent.
Well, you could also take it as your nonprofits now have been given some time back to do their work that they're doing. Instead of filling out 2 applications and attending 2 presentations and doing 2, now they're doing 1, and that frees up time for them to go do their nonprofit work.
And sort of alleviating staff time is something they can do something else, so there's an efficiency built in there as well.
To be in this conversation, is there any, how do you all envision the internal management of this with your bandwidth? Is there a compensatory component to this partnership?
Yeah.
What does that look like?
We are not, admittedly not great at that. And fee for service is something we need to be sure that we are compensated fairly for this kind of thing. Especially that was part of the discussion internally about scaling up. Because if we were to take on a few more grant cycles, we potentially would need at least a part-time staff person. Typically, I mean, that's something I think we would want to mutually agree upon with our scholarship administration, which is probably the closest thing to compare. It's a 3% of the total amount of money. We could talk about it based on number of applications. We could, I mean, we're flexible in that regard. We just have to be careful because we have a tendency to be like, oh yeah, we'll do that. No problem.
So what you're thinking of what the percentage, you know, if you're, you know, say we're, you know, our pot is $200,000 per cycle.
It's not that much.
I'm hypothetical. You know, because it's a number that I can work with, you know, 3% is, you know, $6,000.
Right.
And that's what.
I gotta get.
Oh, no.
You guys don't take this.
100,000, 3,000.
I'm just trying to make it work in my brain. So if that was the case, you know, I know what that scenario looks like. What is your thinking of, you know, I have a hard time imagining what a per grant, you know, system would look like. How would you know, what's your thinking on that?
You mean per grant application or
Per
site?
application fee, you know, like a fixed fee for every application.
Oh, yeah, that was an interesting idea that came up within our staff discussing it. We would have to explore more what that looked like, but it would essentially, and that may be more applicable to the third option. If there were totally separate grant cycles set up with a different review committee, maybe more council direct involvement in that, then it would make a big difference for staff and that review committee if we were reviewing 15 applications or 55 applications. So not necessarily a per application, but just taking into account quantity. I think it's easier to do the percentage of the dollars available. For no other reason than, well, one
It's
reason
simple.
being, you know roughly how many organizations you've funded. Well, you do know on average how many you've funded through this cycle over the last, let's say we averaged 5 years. We would know that there aren't suddenly probably gonna be 20 coming out of the woodwork.
So.
What if, sorry,
You know, so regardless of what the number of applicants, would be, just the dollar amount. You could take that dollar amount and divide it by the number of applicants and then, apply that number.
Oh, okay.
I'm,
I see what you mean as far as allocating the funding to the applicants.
it's always gonna cost you more money to do more reviews and all of that, and I totally agree with your idea that it'd be better to have one review committee because just from an expense perspective, fewer people involved, the better.
And then for the fee for service, that would be staff input, not committee input, right?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, the committee volunteers.
So, yeah, so the committee is volunteer, so we'd be addressing sort of input for staff time to clear applications as, what was the word?
To get them ready.
For eligibility.
Eligibility.
Yeah,
So it's specifically for the eligibility.
And for interacting with council and whatever role you're playing in that, yeah.
Yep, okay.
Can we allocate the fee to them out of the community grant funds for the language of what it is? I think that's what we've been doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, cool. I just want to be sure.
You're asking, would we pay the commission out of the community grants fund?
Yeah.
Yes.
And so, yeah, go ahead, Roman.
It's a slightly different topic, but go ahead.
Okay, I was just gonna speak to that, the way I would encourage you to think about that fee, yes, it is covering our staff time, but to Steve's earlier point of the in-house resources we have, I mean, by supporting our staff time, we do, and I know Alex is familiar with it too, we do one-on-one grant feedback. So for anyone who applies for our grant cycle, they get a half hour of one-on-one time to have feedback on what was well received, what was off the mark on their grant application, and we've seen huge progression with our local nonprofits. I can't say that the Community Foundation gets full credit for that, but the improvement in grant writing skills over the years has been pretty profound. And so that would be a piece that's kind of an added benefit, and then what we're doing day to day is assisting the nonprofits. So that fee piece is supporting our other work with the local nonprofits.
and as far as how you review the grant recipient on the back end, what does that look like? Because, obviously you get a report, but, what are your expectations as far as, that report and how it informs you about how well they did or did not apply the funds so that if they come back, you have some type of data on, oh, well, last time, they were, suspect in this area, and I was, bad word. But, not quite as diligent as they could have been, and, how diligent we would like them to be with public funds. So can you speak to that just a little?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're fortunate because we're in the business of working with the nonprofits. That's one input we get. But we fortunately have an ongoing relationship or dialogue of sorts with most any of these organizations that are applying. So we're getting a much closer picture into what they're up to. So and you'd actually be surprised with those reports and how there's not much concern on our end, as far as how the funds are being used. And we did think that would be an opportunity to engage council with those Mount CB funds. So say there's reporting specifically for the Mount CB funds. While that's done, right? Those funds have been spent, they've reported on them. Council can review that report out, and maybe there's some mechanism there for, like we have a docking system in our application. So there's certain things that if the applicant does not do something correctly, they're docked points right off the top. there would potentially be a way to say, hey, council had concerns about these 3 organizations. Going into next year's cycle, we want to make sure X, Y, Z are, looked at by the committee or staff or whatever that's like.
But I would say also at the kind of end of the day, right, it's like a due diligence thing. It's not with the expectation that somebody somewhere to a margin, a percentage is definitely gaming it and we need to catch them. It's more like, oh, wow, 30 grand from this guy, this organization sort of was misappropriated. What, did it come from us? And we can go back in and check. And so it's sort of an accurate that.
Yeah.
I had a question. With, it sounds like with your point system that when you dock people right off the bat, I'm hearing there's sort of parameters and you hold people's feet to the fire.
Yeah, we've done a lot of work on, trying to make everything as transparent as we can the last few years. So we've done a lot of work on matching the scoring criteria that the review committee uses with the application and what we're asking of the applicants. And then putting all of that on our website so that the applicants can go right in and see, this is where I'm being scored, even the numbers that are attached to that. And I think that's been really helpful for the reviewers and for the nonprofits.
And then what's your methodology with handling requests that exceed money available?
Well, we typically have requests that we see that every year. And so usually, and there's some difference in how a review committee will approach this, but generally speaking, this is how they approach it. So they've done their own individual draft scoring. They come together that day, talk through each application. We have 53 this year. And then they finalize their scoring. We see how that comes out in the aggregate, and they essentially look for breaks in the scoring is how it's happened the last several years. And so they'll start with like, all right, those top 5, there's then like a 2-point gap to the next. So let's give them 100% of the funding, and they play with that until they get to the money available.
So it has nothing to do with importance or values or any of the other things. It's strictly like they qualified and we need to sift them out that way.
Yep.
Well, but the values and all that, that's the scoring.
Yeah.
And that's what the review committee handles. In our internal review of these docking systems, and that's all very much structural to determine that eligibility to go then to the community members who are looking for those values and all of that is written into our rubric. So that's kind of the delineation between our internal review and committee review is like structural eligibility. Did you upload the right things in the right places so the committee can do their job in reviewing it? And then they determine and their scores reflect this aggregate that we're in this.
That's huge.
So let me ask this a different way, I guess, if I could. We ran into an issue last time around where we had this same scenario. And for me, it was more of a values, what's maybe more critical or important
To the
versus
community.
to the community versus valuable, but maybe less critical. And we didn't have that system built in, and I'm wondering, does that even exist?
Well, I think where it's come up for us is when there's something that's low scoring. The one I can think of, because we've had similar discussions in that review committee day, was early childhood. And it was, they'd gotten to this, let's do 100% funding for these scores, 90, 80, down to, here's the line. And we're saying no funding for these organizations. And they had a really good discussion about, but I think early childhood, these daycare centers are critically important. We have to fund it. And they fell below what we deem as, a stellar application or even close to stellar application, and had that conversation. We've had 1 year where the group decided to stick with, we drew the line there. They will learn a lot in their feedback session and why they didn't get these particular funds. It will not make or break the organization. And then 1 year when they said, yep, we want to drop that line down and give them that funding because we think it's so important to the community.
But I'm talking about those being the same, 2 high scoring entities. It has nothing to do with the points. It's like, well, these are equal. We have more money than we know it, or more applications than we have money.
Is there
The critical importance versus like you guys do this, which is valued in a certain way, and you guys do that, which is valued in a certain.
Yeah, we've always steered our cycle to place the highest value on how the information is presented in the application. And we've asked the applicants to basically not assume that anyone in the room knows anything about them. And so I think if you wanted to value, like, let's say certain sectors of the nonprofit landscape more, we would need to just go about it in that way and have that built in.
And maybe we can, if anybody has any interest, when that, if that comes to that, having that conversation.
Well, and it strikes me too that you are trying to avoid scenarios where people are sitting next to each other, right? Everybody, it's top to bottom. So there isn't really, these two applications are equal. There's always a scenario where
Right.
one is a half point ahead.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's kind of how they address that there. There's never a scenario where it's which one of these do we pick? They figure out a way where one is going to be better. So to speak.
Yeah, or these two high scoring applications, they get funding, right? It's more when we get into those like those low scores where there are those conversations.
We have, other grant fund requesters other than nonprofits.
Mhm.
And at least in my mind, something that's important to me is if we're going to, fund some, a for-profit activity, we have, or at least I have an expectation that at some point in the future, they're going to stop asking us for our money
Mhm.
because they're sharp enough to figure out how to get their program off the ground and running, because their intention is to make money. So, even if it's, it's just not. Do you guys have any kind of expectation that at some point, you will be turning the tap off? And because they have demonstrated or, shared their, long-range plan to wean themselves from grant money.
Well, so we don't really deal with the for-profit.
Well, you would be with us.
Yeah, not in this
Like,
segment. Yeah, not. this
Oh.
cycle.
Yeah, not at.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. My bad.
Yeah, but I will speak to something similar because we used to have a 3-year sit out rule. So if you receive funding, grant funding from us for 3 years, you had to sit out a year. We also told folks that they were limited on how many years they could apply for a certain project, let's say. Because same thing, you want to see, here's the project, we need help getting it up and running, and we want to see a long-term plan. We've actually let both of those go, because what we've discovered is that these organizations are really good at what they do, and they get naturally weeded out. So when we see the same, say, program through the local school that comes in every year, it's scoring lower if the review committee feels like they're just coming back to us every year and not making any other attempt to find funds. So it's sort of a natural.
Okay, so you do have, as part of your grading criteria, if you keep coming back, that's like points off.
We don't, because we found we didn't need it. We found those were scoring lower, because there's enough continuity in some of the members. Like we'll have grant members who've been there for 3 years, grant reviewers. And those were getting lower scores because for that reason, they didn't like to see that. So we didn't have to dictate it.
What's the
So,
conversation?
the impression I get is you might not have it in writing, but there is experiential input that says, yeah, no, so you do have a judgment that is brought to bear about whether or not you know, these are the best people to keep, you know, giving money to. Okay. You know, it kind of goes back to the whole idea of, you know, people trying to game the system.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see when you get the viewpoint of seeing these applications year over year, and anyone who's applying has access to staff. It's primarily Scott who fields those calls and is providing guidance when organizations ask questions on what they're gonna be applying for. But what we see is that when you have a very strong case on paper and you're demonstrating your progress and your change over time, that shows through even in a short grant application. It's pretty quickly evident if you're kind of just copying and pasting and plopping it on the page year after year.
What's the composition of the review committee and how often are different reviewers cycling through that committee?
Yeah, so it's usually a pretty even split, North Valley, South Valley, full-time, part-time. As with anything, we struggle a little bit with getting younger members, but we usually have at least a couple under the age of 40.
That's you.
It's nice to know that's where the threat.
We do, in the last couple of years, we've made sure to have someone who's very involved in the community, who's a immigrant. We try and balance different representation as much as we can. We don't have a formal policy on term limits per se. For the most part, we want people to serve at least 2 years and not more than 3 or 4 at one time. And so those are pretty staggered. Like this year, I think we have 2 or 3 new members.
3 new.
3 new members.
I can see a lot of benefit for us, for having you guys doing this for us. And I think if we're gonna turn it over to you, that we turn it over to you and we don't look back over your shoulder and like what option 3 provides. And, you know, critique it because it's hard where we get into trouble.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it would be valuable to try and really identify like what is the most important thing for you to see. You know, what is what's very important to you, and we could maybe distill that down to 2 or 3 questions that are that supplemental piece specific for Mount CB funds. And then we can determine to what extent you want to be involved.
I think just a reporting back at the end.
I'm with Janet. I think the whole purpose and value in this is turning it over and having the separation. And obviously we would, we'd want to convey our values to you and maybe have a few extra questions for a Mount CD process. But to me, I think that's about as far as it should go. Turn it over to you. You're the pros. We let you do your work and based on the guidelines that we give you. And obviously it'd be a pilot program and we'd have some review to see how it all went, but that's kind of how I envision it, is what you said, Janet. So
I think it even, maybe this is taking one more step. I would say that like us informing them on what are important to us, that comes from the master plan work that we've already done. And so it's really just a matter of us reinterpreting all of that into a one sheet for them, not us sort of starting from scratch.
agreed.
There's gotta be a harder way.
We'll find it. I'm sure.
We should get a committee going with them.
I already got some great ideas for it.
Roland's gonna chair it.
Yeah. I guess I will say too, this from the other side of things, potential PR, the optics of evenly represented Gunnison County Committee approving art funding, that might irk somebody, maybe, I guess, something we might want to consider.
Sure.
Or just how, like, there might be some things that really work well for a community organization, but for the municipal government, we might want some parts short enough for how they select that community or something. Those might be issues.
Well, I think the geographic part of it, I mean, we are talking about North Valley programs, so I think that would help with that.
That and the one page you're talking about, I think that creates, if we do it right, it should create a very simple.
I agree.
A rubric to inform their rubric.
Well, it's kind of like what, I guess not exactly how it operates, but it's almost like how MetRec deals with the two district grant applications type of a thing, which is nebulous at best.
Whether it's, Met or Rec.
The like full
Or North Valley or South Valley.
yeah, because you can apply them, yeah. Another point I really like is, right, with you guys, your board approves the money and then your committee approves the funding, right?
Yeah.
So what we would be doing at this point is right now, we're doing both. And I like this separation.
Yeah.
I really like that. Yeah. Go ahead. Yes.
Well, Alex, looking at his notes, anybody else have questions?
No, just general, but I prefer this approach. I think it brings more value to the applicants. Yeah, I like how from, and I don't think, I think you guys should approach it from a fair compensation component, especially with, I think, the resource ad, and I have to imagine a lot of folks who aren't engaging you currently, but may, and I haven't seen those, so I don't know what the crossover is, but if there are some that aren't, I would have to imagine that when they came to you, they're gonna receive valuable inputs that may potentially reduce our own town staff because they get better writing grants, and they're using these resources to put in better applications for ed techs or other things, so I like it.
I like it also. I am questioning, why would we not want to do this? What is the,
I think,
what would be any benefit of not doing it that would better serve our community?
One thing that I can think of is what Alec mentioned, is that the public might say, why are you giving away town funds through a committee that's not run by the town, that's run by somebody else, stuff like that. But I think we've just answered all of those questions. Why?
And a response to that would be sort of like the First Tracks response in the sense of, well, we're running a pilot. Or,
Well, there's that.
something.
But again,
along
I think
those lines. Because we will be able to, are we signing a contract with you?
I imagine
Or is there something that, and, and the duration of that contract is what?
Well, if I may, I don't wanna stall a conversation, but towards the end, what I was gonna say is if through this work session, what I'm hearing, and you can confirm the guidance is, what I'm hearing is we would like to explore a services agreement with the community foundation to manage our community grants. So the guidance would be to work with staff on putting that together. Of course, I would assume you'd want to see that, so we would bring that back to you at a future meeting. And just for everyone's benefit, we did add an agenda item to this, just in case something probably maybe more necessary came out of this meeting that would require a motion. I don't think that guidance that I just described does. So at least for your benefit, know that you don't have to sit through the regular meeting to get to that point and say, well, we already discussed it. So again, I didn't mean to curtail any of the final discussion there, but I think as we approach the end of this work session, if that's where you are, I think that would be where we could go with that. So, yeah.
I would, like to know if you would be comfortable with, like a 1-year contract to get the thing started as, essentially a pilot, so that, we're not committing to something for, like 5 years. And, I'm not opposed to a 5-year commitment as long as we have the option on the front end to limit it, to nip it in the bud in the first year for some other reason. It seems like it's not in our best interest, which I can't imagine what that would be, but I would like to see something like that on the.
I think that's what we're talking about, Dwayne.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's.
Yeah, we don't, there's
Okay.
nothing that requires us to have any more commitment than the first year.
Okay,
There's
well,
like-
when you get into contracts, you gotta kind of be aware.
Well, there's many ways to structure a contract.
Right on.
We can address that.
Yeah.
We probably, that's good to know that that's where you come from, because we can put that into the contract.
Thank you.
But it's all, and compensation, of course, is a key component.
Yeah.
But probably tonight is not
Yeah,
the night to get into the weeds too deeply on the details. We'll have the opportunity.
well, and I appreciate your summary, Carlos, and so I think with that, unless there's,
I was just gonna say, because of timing, we'll still be doing this year's.
Yeah,
No, so we've already done 2024.
yeah,
So 2025
yeah,
is when they'll take it over.
yeah.
Right on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if I could get from you guys, so it sounds like you wanna use their application. You want the Mount Crescent Butte funds separate. And I should schedule another work session for you guys to come up with the questions, the additional supplemental questions you want.
Supplemental questions and like a value statement or something like that, the details we've
The
discussed.
details you want added to our question, yeah.
And we'll find out some of that when we go through doing the 2024 grants, the things will hit us. I mean, we could start with it, but we may add or subtract or modify
You mean the
as when we
2025?
do the actual granting in December, whenever we do it.
We're already done. So we did 2024 in November of 2023.
Oh, okay.
And then we didn't release the funds until 2024, but 2024, we're done for community grants.
Oh,
Twenty
okay.
twenty-five is next.
Oh, I thought we still
Yeah.
had a year.
Yes, so
we had
if
to
you
do.
guys decided not to go with them, then we would be gearing up for exactly what you're talking about.
Okay, I thought we still had a year to do it.
No,
Okay.
All right, is that sufficient direction?
yes,
You guys
yeah.
good? Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. You guys have anything else before we?
I don't think so. Well, I'll get the last few years grant recipients from Tiffany, just so we can double check.
Yeah.
And get reporting information to you.
I think also just for, many eyes and me, it might be nice, this is a minor point, for us to actually go line by line over their grant application all together at the same table.
Sure, we could do that in
The next-
the detailed session that we're talking about.
That'd be great.
Yeah, and I would say you'll probably also want to see our grant application to see what questions we have that maybe y'all don't.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe you might want it.
All right.
Maybe.
Well, thank you both very much.
Yeah.
First of all, thanks for being open to this, and then thank you also for coming up here tonight and spending time with us. And I think this would be a great thing, hopefully beneficial for all of us.
Thank you.
And the
Thank
community,
you.
and the community, most important.
Yeah, in our local nonprofits and government programs. Thank you all
Yeah,
Thank you, appreciate it.
all right.
for thinking outside the box.